So Claire, thank you so much for coming around. I was working out that you and I first started working together 18 years ago.
Wow.
Obviously, we were very, very,
very young. Yeah.
But I was also reflecting that my function when we worked together in the NHS was mainly referred to as public relations and mainly seen as quite a transactional media operation, really, if we're honest. And yours was called human resources. Although when you started, it was called personnel.
It was.
So, but that's really changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, hugely, hugely. And I mean, personnel was always a bit of an old-fashioned name, but human resources just had such a bad reputation because people have said to me, should it be in human remains? Should it be in human resource? You know, all the things where it's just the person isn't there. It's just, it is just a commodity, or, you know, some people talk about human capital, and I think that's even worse. It's like, you know, there is a person in all of that. So it's good that it's changed, but it's taken time. And that's not the same through each industry. Some industries still do call it HR. Some call it people management. So I prefer the latter, clearly.
And I think also, you know, that transactional nature, you know, when I first started working in corporate affairs, you know, 30 years ago, it was very transactional. And hugely. It was, you know, I think the way that you've described the people function is similar to the comms function, which was, it wasn't about people, you know, and organisations put themselves at the forefront. Yeah. You know, it was absolutely about reputation management, about spin. Yeah. Not about people, stories.
Hugely agree with that. And I think you've already said it, but when I think about the transactional, so I didn't start off in HR, so I started off in more general management and then moved into HR because I was interested in people. And I remember a colleague who gave me my first job in HR above all the other HR people who are already qualified said, it's because I can see that you're interested in people, which was huge for me. And actually I'm going to visit her in a couple of weeks. I haven't seen her since 1995. So anyway, that's an aside story. But I think that I did have an interest in people, but I had to learn all the transactional stuff that you do that almost takes the people element out. You know, so recruiting, you've got to do it within this time frame, you've got to do this. But there's people in there who are potentially damaged by what you do when you interview them and then say no. So I think that has massively changed. But also, Sarah, I don't know if you agree with this, for me, I think it changed in human resources and people management because actually people are starting to choose whether they want to work for you or not. So you have to really change. You have to really show that you are people-centred. Whereas I'm not sure we did 20 years ago in the NHS. If you turned up, got the interview, you might got the job, you might not. We probably didn't care too much one way or the other how that landed with you. But now, do absolutely loads to lure people in and then keep them. Yeah. Because it's a huge cost. And there's, you know, probably the same within what you do as well. And actually that's good. That's good for my function. That makes us much more people focused, I think. Perhaps not everywhere.
And I think, you know, I think there's something really interesting in the crossover of our two areas. Yeah. And, you know, you and I worked very closely together on lots of really brilliant things, but also on some really, really challenging things.
Horrible things.
Horrible things. Yeah. But I think that we did put the person at the centre of that. Yeah. You know, so the work that we did on the values of the organisation were all about people. Yeah. Yeah. But also when you have to deliver really bad news, it's also about putting the person at the centre of that, isn't it? And I think for our areas of work, I think there's been a coming together in highly functioning organisations, a coming together of people and communications. Yeah. Because there is a person at the centre of it. Yeah. And I think really good comms departments tell stories and really good HR people departments tell stories.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I think interesting what you said there about values. I remember us doing those values workshops, hundreds of them, I think, but actually getting people into a room and really listening to them and showing that we were really listening. And then I remember us going to the board to say, this is what we think. And them almost being more worried about what the graphics looked like rather than what the people had said. And I remember that was really strong thinking, why are they worrying about what the graphic is? Look what people have said about this organisation, this brilliant hospital in Bristol. And so that was really interesting for me. And we did work really close together on some really horrible things as well, like you said, where people get some really horrible outcomes because of what we sometimes had to do. And so, yeah, I agree with that. And now I can't imagine in the job that I've just finished not working that closely with comms and not working that closely with the So for me, it was the kind of HR function, the people function, the staff engagement function, and the comms function. It's just kind of a continuum now. And we don't always agree. Sometimes we don't agree at all. But I don't think any chief people officer can do their job without the equivalent of your role well. And we've got to look united on some of our campaigns and things, and we didn't always before. So yeah, really, really interesting. And it makes my job more interesting because I learn more about another profession.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think historically, if I think back to, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there was a very unhealthy rivalry almost between, how the people function operated and how the communications function operated, particularly in staff engagement and internal comms.
Yes.
And I think, I can remember saying to you, I don't care. I really don't care who takes the lead on this.
Yeah.
One of us needs to, and then we just need to do it together.
Yeah.
And, when I think about some of the things we did, like open a brand new hospital, the Bristol Heart Institute and the recruitment that was required for that, I believe was only successful because the recruitment, the comms, the people, the structure, the operations, we all worked really, really closely together.
I'd agree.
And I think, at the end of the day, yes, in both of our functions, there are moments of process. Of course there are.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah.
But at the centre of it is telling the story of people.
Yeah. No, I agree. And for me, because I've worked in higher education, and I know you've worked in other sectors now, but higher education and the National Health Service, it's the same importance in both, even though they're very, very different ways of working. And I think, I don't know, I mean, I still probably sometimes get a little bit irritated with my comms colleagues if they don't say things exactly as I want it said. But then I do also really appreciate their knowledge and understanding of how to say things so they'll land better. And, perhaps sometimes we are a bit legalistic in HR about how to say things. And, I don't think I'm a person like this, but my team are, and that's appropriate because they do need to follow legal frameworks and things. So sometimes there's still that little bit of a rub, but it's not like it used to be. I honestly, and I don't know whether it's because we're more senior, Sarah, but I think both of our functions used to be so transactional. And now I think they're absolutely central to running an organisation well, hugely. And I think that's recognised now. I think we perhaps get some of the attention that we deserve for what we do, whereas I wasn't sure that was always the case a few years ago. So I think people like you, I and others have kind of built that reputation that this is really important to our people and they are our most important asset. And they're not just a resource.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, there are still organisations that we won't name who don't get it right.
No.
And who end up with all kinds of issues.
Yeah.
Which I would say is because they have not listened. They've not actively listened to what's happening.
Yeah.
They've made strategic decisions that often don't include contributions from people, specialists and communication specialists, and they end up in trouble.
Yeah.
But I think those that have done brilliantly.
Yeah.
And, there are NHS organisations where you and I have worked that have transformed who they are.
Yeah.
And, Robert Woolley, who we both worked with at Bristol, said when he was retiring, the single most important change I made was to listen to our people.
Yeah.
And I sat there for a minute and I thought, I think that might be a bit of our legacy there, Claire.
Yeah, perfect.
But, I do think that it's so important. And, one of the things I say, and in fact, I said it on Friday in some media training that we were doing for a client, and they said, well, I've got an open door policy. And I said, right, I am allergic to that phrase. Because do you remember how hard it was to go and knock on a manager's door?
Of course. And the director's door, you wouldn't even dare walk down the corridor.
Well,
never mind knock on the door.
And I think, and that's something I say a lot on the board positions that I have is, come on, guys, really? You're expecting someone to leave, particularly in education and health, where the majority of your staff are in front-facing roles.
Yeah.
So you're asking them to leave that, potentially go to a completely different building,
knock on your
walk
door.
past a bank of executive assistants, No.
You won't get through.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah,
and,
no, it's not.
You know, I heard a Vice-Chancellor say, I can't remember what day it was. Let's say every Tuesday afternoon, I go and eat my lunch there. I put a sign in front that says, you know, Steve is listening. And anyone who wants to come and talk to me, they can come and talk to me. And you think that is more commonplace.
Yeah.
But it's quite new.
Yeah. Although I do remember a chief executive nameless who used to say, it's okay, I eat my lunch in the canteen so people can come and talk to me. You know it's chief executive I'm talking about. But then he just read his paper the whole time, so nobody could go and talk to him because he was just like that. So sometimes that I'm going to do it and not really wanting to do it. And then there's the absolutely wanting to do it. And I agree. And we do have to be visible, but you're right, but people shouldn't come to you. But there is still that expectation, I think. I don't know. I think it's difficult, and I don't think things like blended working have helped that much because people don't spend enough time just passing in the corridors anymore. The best thing about Bristol and Park Street is the amount of people you pass walking to parts, for me, different parts of the campus of the university, and it'll be the same for the NHS as well. But that's where you end up having your connections and having those conversations, because actually we're not all in every day. We're not in our offices every day. So I think, especially for our functions, we've got to really find ways to communicate so that staff do know that we're listening, because I'm not sure we always do listen and they need to know we're listening. And I don't know how we do that. I've been trying to think about how we do that through the last couple of years of blended working, but I think it's harder. I think it's much harder than it used to be. So comms are hugely important in that respect.
I think the issue of young people is really important. And I think you've seen it front and centre at the university.
Yeah.
I've seen it through the lens of the Taylor Bennett Foundation, where our young people are coming on our training courses in the workplace. For many of them, they're the first to have gone to uni.
Right.
They're the first to enter a profession.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to behave. And I think we're building up a kind of head of steam of young people who perhaps are 4 or 5 years into work or 1 or 2 years into work, and they've had this bizarre experience of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And what sort of things did you start thinking about at the university around that?
Yeah, and I think, our COVID kids had a really tough time. They didn't get the teaching that they perhaps they signed up for. They were living in their, accommodation on their own. And we've come out of that hugely, and teaching has changed as a result, I believe, and staff have changed as a result, but so have students. Some students never want to go into lecture theatre anymore. They didn't enjoy it in the first place, but love learning online. For others, that's terrible. So it is all about that blend. And I think what we tried to do at the university was ensure there was a blend, but also it's the same for staff, because actually staff got used to not coming onto campus either, and actually could teach quite well with the right kit, from home, but you still need that human interaction. And we're quite lucky at the university, as I'm sure lots are. We do take on lots of graduates. We take on our own graduates, and it's about how you give them. And I know people in my team who, 21, 22, so full of excitement and enthusiasm, want to be in the buildings, but actually most of their team's working from home. So it is difficult, and we are reviewing how much we need to be on campus, how much we should stay at home, etc. Because actually I do worry more about that generation, that they haven't got the same, I'm not quite sure what the word is, but they haven't learned yet how to be in the workplace because they haven't had enough time, but also they haven't had lots of kind of mentors who were just wandering around saying, yeah, that's how you use the photocopy. Nobody uses photocopy anymore, but you know what I mean? So that's quite interesting for me, how we get to this next stage with that young group who deserve to be able to be in and interacting and not always in their own headspace at home in their bedroom or whatever. So I think that's going to really change in the next 5 years. I don't really like the big companies that are saying you must be in 3 days a week. I mean, our own government's saying it for some of their offices, and people are going out on strike and all sorts of things, because that's not right either. Let's grab what we've got out of the awful pandemic and think about how we work differently in the future. That's really important, I think, for engagement. So you've got to do that really well. But also, why shouldn't we have a bit more work-life balance? Why should they work as many hours as we worked in the NHS or in higher education or wherever? I'm a big advocate of allow people to work for you, but also do their own thing, because that'll help keep them healthy and sane, probably.
And I think that, I think now we know that people can work from home.
Yeah.
We all did it for 2 years. So we know that's possible. But I think in our professions, those moments of coming together, particularly to kind of creatively problem solve,
really important,
are so important.
Yeah.
And I think also that, for me, I get great inspiration by being out and about.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think, to your point about those chance encounters, I've met people by chance who've gone on to be hugely helpful.
Yeah.
Either personally or in my profession or in helping to create stuff. So I think you're right. I think there needs to be, what are those things? Please God, there's something positive we can hang on to from such an awful experience.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But also, how do we encourage people back into the workplace? And I think, as you say, it is particularly pertinent for those young people who haven't had that kind of socialization.
Yeah.
But I think that we can bring a balance of the two.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was interested in the use of the word "we," Claire.
Oh,
because that isn't where you are anymore, is it?
No.
You've made a big,
huge
brave,
decision.
bold decision. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I left the University of Bristol on the 28th of March, but then, so I was Chief People Officer there for nearly 6.5 years, and I did love it, and it was great, and I met some amazing people, professional services and academic staff, and some brilliant students who I've had contact with some of them recently, so now I'm leaving, and they've said some really lovely things that have really kind of landed well. I don't know, I'm getting on a bit. My kids are both, one's about to hopefully qualify as a medical student, and I've got another child who's got a year to go. So they kind of don't need bank of mum quite so much. So I just decided I'd take at least 6 months out. I'm going to go travelling, I'm going to go in my camper van. I'm going to be driving around Scotland and then go down to Europe and then just see what that brings after that. So I'm not quite retirement age. Don't get me an NHS pension for another few years. But just want to do something for me. And I think a bit like the pandemic and, things that you've been through as well, you just sometimes have to think about what's right for you. And at this point in time, you know me, I love running, I love my mountains. I want to still be able to do all of that whilst I'm still fit enough. So I've actually got an idea. I think we should all stop working at 50, have the next 10 years off, or perhaps 15 years, and then go back to work when we're too old, decrepit to do anything useful. Think that'll work? No.
I don't know, but I think there is something about getting into your 50s and thinking about what is it that I want to do.
Yeah.
Now, the 100-year life would say, well, you're only halfway through.
God help us follow to 100.
And there's still a lot more to be done. But I think, those opportunities to pause and really think about what it is that we want to do are absolutely amazing, and to have the opportunity, I think, is a real privilege.
And I was going to say it's a huge privilege, and I know not everybody can do it, and I do feel really fortunate. But I can live quite cheaply as well. My van doesn't cost much, but it is really, I don't know. I want some time for me. I want some time for my head, and then I'll decide what I want to do after that, if anything.
And if I think about whether I would ever do that, the idea of it terrifies me.
Okay.
Because I think, what would my brain do?
Yeah.
But you took a sabbatical and you learned the lesson that you didn't need work in the way that you thought you might.
Yeah, and Bristol University were brilliant. So I knew when I hit my 5-year mark, I wanted a break. But also my youngest son was going to university, and I knew I would empty nester, would massively miss it, and just didn't want the quietness of the house. So Bristol were brilliant and said, yes, do have a sabbatical because we'd like you to come back. So I did say, look, I'm happy to leave. And they're like, no. So I took 4 months off, and I was very lucky, and I went off to Borneo and Australia, New Zealand, etc. And I had 4 months off from, hopefully nobody from Bristol University is watching this. I didn't miss work once. And I thought I would. I really thought I'd miss, using your brain, having to, people giving you, a conundrum really, and you work it through with colleagues. It might have been I was in a beautiful part of the world and the sun was shining, but I was fine. I could still keep my brain going just with reading and, looking at stuff that I was in and learning about the country that I was in. Borneo is an amazing country that I learned so much about, and the people are wonderful. So I think that was my toe in the water. Can I cope with not working? And I could. And so, to be fair to Bristol, I wanted to give them a year. So it's exactly a year from when I started back last year from my, when I finished my sabbatical. I've given them a year back, and then I said I was leaving. And they were fine, because I think they knew that I wanted to do something else. But they've been great, and they're a brilliant employer, and I have really enjoyed working for them. So yeah, I might not feel the same in 4 months or 6 months, Sarah, but at the moment, I'm really looking forward to some time for me.
And I think you've really earned it.
Thank you.
You know, I think you've worked so bloody hard, Claire. And, you know, it's been fantastic to have worked alongside you and then kept in touch with you. And, you know, when we sit down and talk about stuff, you know, you are really good at what you do because you care so much, and you can't make that up, you know. And I think when you and I have reflected on some of the really, really difficult things we had to do, I believe we did them in the right way because we really cared. And I think that is the thing you cannot teach someone. No. You can teach someone how to do the job. Yeah. You can teach somebody, you know, in you know, kind of what's the word I'm looking for? You can teach through structured ways, informal ways, but what you can't teach is emotional intelligence. No, and I think particularly in our roles, if you don't care, well, you revert to the functionality of where our profession started, that transactional, functional approach. And I think, you know, the creativity that sits at the centre of the crossover of people and communications only comes when you really care about what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I wasn't sure how I'd feel about leaving the University of Bristol, or even whether I'd left a legacy, but I've had such wonderful comments about what I have left behind. It's really nice to, you know, it was very heartwarming for me, and it made me kind of think, yeah, I can make a difference, and I am people-centred, and that obviously has landed. Won't have landed with everybody, but it's landed enough to make me feel that I made a bit of a difference while I was there. And perhaps, you know, in the future I can do that again. But for now, it's all about that camper van and Scotland and the midges.
Good luck.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.